What's up, everybody? First off, a special thank you to Bob and Maggie Seaver and Top Shelf House Call Grooming. And for everybody that weighed in on that video yesterday and all the well wishes, appreciate it. So, like I said, Ruckus had been licking his paws for a couple days, and then yesterday morning I got up and I noticed some swelling, but then we had to go pick up some flooring about a half hour away, and it was noticeably more swelling just from when I first saw it a couple hours earlier. And then I noticed that it was starting to ooze a little bit. That's when I said, okay, hell with work. This is not good. And I started calling every vet within a 2-hour radius, finally found one. He took one look at it and said, yep, we're going to have to knock him out and drain that. Now we got him on some antibiotics and hopefully everything's going to be fine. Poor little guy did not like that experience, of course. Brought him home, put him in front of the heater, his favorite space, and let him kind of sleep it off for a while. You can see his foot bandaged up there. When he did start coming around, he wouldn't even look at me for a couple hours. He's not happy about that. But when he was getting up and around, he started wanting to chew on those bandages, and he's very aggressive about an injury. He doesn't want you to touch it if he's hurt, but he did seem to understand that we had to do that for his own good and that he needs to leave it alone for a little while. So he hasn't tore it off yet. Then for dinner last night, he got 4 whole pork chops and some chicken. After that, he'd at least look at me, and he did come snuggle with me in bed some last night, but, you know, anytime I'd turn over, he'd start growling at me because now he's got trust issues, which I can't blame him. But he did get up about sunrise and came in here and sat down in front of the heater, and he's just sitting there chilling as I'm making this video, which is kind of standard protocol at the static house. So for Thanksgiving, I'm just grateful my little buddy's feeling okay. And I hope all you guys have a great Thanksgiving out there. Okay, so you guys know that Machu Picchu was just discovered in 1911, just a little over 100 years ago. It's not like nobody knew about the Inca. This was just like a royal residence up in the mountains. And I would kind of think that it was spotted by planes, but no, the locals knew about it, and they took Hiram Bingham, that's him on the left up there, and he was the first Westerner to lay eyes on it. And I'm kind of jealous of people that lived in this time frame because, I mean, there were many real-life Indiana Jones out there. This guy was a Yale professor, an aviator during Dub 1, and it was a time when you didn't have to put a warning label saying that coffee is hot because everybody knows coffee's hot. Then the bureaucratic nanny state managed to take all the fun out of the world. But if you look closely at Machu Picchu, and I'm sure some of you have, you'll see the ancient, highly skilled megalithic stonework, and then you'll see the rough, uncut, just stacked stonework. Some of these were built from scratch that way, but oftentimes you'll see the megalithic on the bottom and then the less intricate stonework on top. And this isn't just in Machu Picchu, it's all over Peru. So the ancient people were the ones that were highly skilled, and the more recent seems like society just devolved. And of course, if somebody's already put in all of the work for the foundation, then it only makes sense to rebuild what's already there. So how is it that the ancients had all of these skills and then the more recent Incas couldn't replicate it? Well, we're going to look at Inca mythology, and, you know, they describe a time when they lived side by side with the gods. And pretty much every culture around the world has stories of one of these gods or another that taught them how to do things. Prometheus in ancient Greece, Quetzalcoatl for the Aztecs, and for the Inca, it's Viracocha. So were these all the same god by different names and just traveled around? Or was this a terraforming expedition and everybody just went to their designated locality? Well, I have a lot of questions like that. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of answers. But as we go through the Inca mythology here, more questions of mine will come up. And I just got another notification from Brian Ranwick. So, hey, thank you very much, man. And just so everybody knows, I've actually been locked out of my PayPal account for a minute now. I spent like an hour last night trying to change the password. They wouldn't let it go through. And then finally this morning it did go through. So I owe some more shout outs out there. So I do appreciate it, guys. And I spent a lot of time cracking my own password last night because I knew people were leaving messages about Ruckus. Okay, so Inca mythology, and this is kind of a modern interpretive version of this, but they bring up some good points, so I'm going with this version. Of course, as with all mythology, there are different versions out there. So if you've heard something slightly different, I'm sure you have. Before the universe took shape, before mountains rose to meet the sky and rivers carved their way through the earth, there was nothing but a dark, silent void. So that's reminiscent of the Egyptian chaos. And in the Bible, God moved upon the waters. But there's actually a lot of old mythology that there was a time before mountains. Now, an often overlooked verse in the Bible that I've always found really interesting, Genesis 7, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. 15 cubits. So that's about 21 feet and is usually interpreted as being 22 feet above the highest mountain, but that's not what it says. It says the water rose 15 cubits and all of the mountains were covered. So was this at a time before the mountains rose to meet the sky? Something I've always wondered about. One more side note, and I'll read the dang thing. Moses was raised by the Egyptians, and there seems to be a lot of similarities between the Egyptian culture and Mesoamerican cultures. So just keep in mind that the story of Genesis may have been what Moses was taught growing up. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that I've seen that God told him these things, but that's the way I've heard it interpreted. And just so you know, Yahweh did ask Moses for a little reminder of what the names of the 12 tribes were, and then said, well, okay, just go ahead and carve them into a breastplate and put them on the priest so I can see them every time I see the priest. Okay, this is going to be a 2-day video if I keep that much commentary in here. So imagine a place of darkness, a place where not a whisper of life existed. There were no stars, no rivers, no warmth, just a vast emptiness, an emptiness so deep and formless it seemed impossible that anything good could ever emerge from it. However, a miracle happened. From out of this void emerged Viracocha, the great creator, a figure who commanded power beyond comprehension. He stood alone in the darkness, observing the chaotic abyss around him, and knew something had to change. Now, regarding whether or not all of these gods were the same god by different names, there can only be one first. And pretty much all cultures agree that there was one god that all of the other gods sprang from. Or these gods were like the last of the Atlanteans, and they had survived the cataclysm and were the first to terraform their little section of Earth, because the next line is, Viracocha didn't waste any time. With a commanding sweep of his will, he began shaping the land. His first act was to raise the towering Andes Mountains, molding their peaks and valleys with purpose. Valleys stretched out beneath his hands, cradling streams and rivers that would soon burst with life. He carved out the coasts where waves would eventually crash, and his touch gave form to the deserts and fertile plains. Viracocha's work was deliberate. He was not just crafting scenery, he was setting the stage for an ordered existence. Yet Viracocha's world was empty, without beings to populate it. His first attempt at life came in the form of giants, enormous creatures made of stone. These giants lumbered across the earth, towering over landscapes he had created. However, they were unruly, defiant, and ignored the purpose they had been given, trampling on the natural world and bringing chaos where there was meant to be harmony. Displeased, Viracocha couldn't allow this disorder to continue. So, in a wave of anger and disappointment, he unleashed a cataclysmic flood. Torrents of water surged across the land, swallowing the disobedient giants and wiping away all that was left of his flawed first creation. When the floodwaters finally receded, Viracocha was left with a blank slate. This time, he knew he had to be more thoughtful and meticulous. His goal wasn't just to create life, but to establish a world where balance and respect for nature reigned. He crafted new rivers that sparkled in the sunlight, forests that whispered with the wind, and plains that would one day ripple with fields of crops. The world was vibrant, brimming with potential, but it was still missing one thing. With the world freshly crafted and the floodwaters now a distant memory, Viracocha knew his work wasn't done. He had made a beautiful and vibrant landscape, but he understood that maintaining this harmony required more than just a watchful eye. It needed guardian beings, beings with power and wisdom to oversee the natural forces he had set into motion. So Viracocha created the first gods. And that's interesting that they start with him creating the other gods because, like in the Bible, by the time Adam was created, all the angels were already there, right? In Islam, they had already created an entire race of jinn, and then Iblis got jealous when God created Adam. So it's interesting they start with the gods first. Had to have been that way, right? So Viracocha created the first gods, each with a specific domain to ensure balance and order. Inti, the sun god, and perhaps the most radiant of Viracocha's creation, was the god of the sun. He burst forth with an aura of warmth and light that made the world come alive. When he ascended into the sky, his golden rays transformed barren fields into fertile lands, giving life to crops and ensuring the prosperity of the Inca people. Now, this structure is known as a Inti Watana, and it means hitching post of the sun. This is because the sun had fallen out of the sky one time and they decided it needed a little help, so they tie it up on a hitching post. I guess that's what happens when you have a culture that actually stays together and tells the same stories for thousands of years, where Western society has lost all of that. I mean, we didn't even know about the Sumerians until the 1800s. So Western society doesn't remember any of this stuff, but then they claim to be the arbiters of truth and don't listen to the superstitious locals. Inti was depicted as a regal, radiant figure with skin that glowed like molten gold and eyes that shone with the intensity of a summer sun. His flowing robes were the color of the brightest sunlight, and a massive golden disc crowned his head, separating the sun itself in his hands. He carried golden rays that he could cast upon the world, bringing both life and heat. So it sounds a lot like they have just personified the attributes of the sun and called this god Inti. But my question here is, did Viracocha make a conscious entity known as Inti and then put him in charge of managing the sun? And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but if you watched this video, remember how in there I said that you're basically just the cell phone, you're just the device that's receiving the signal. Well, in that scenario, you can look at it as the sun as the transmitter of the signal. But in reading about the ancient gods, I've often wondered if simultaneously a conscious spirit and the sun or the moon or the planet were created, to where, say, Saturn is not only a planet up in the sky, but a consciousness that can come down to Earth. I know that's kind of out there, but we can only see the visible light spectrum. We only have very small amounts of the bigger picture that we access. So I don't necessarily think of the totality of everything as nuts and bolts that we're able to perceive. To complement Inti's brilliance, Viracocha created Mama Kia, the goddess of the moon. The moon is always portrayed as female, which makes sense. All of the primordial gods came in matching pairs, basically. Her soft silver glow was a stark contrast to Inti's blazing light, but it was just as essential. Mama Kia ruled the night sky, bringing a sense of calm and order to the darkness. She was the protector of women and the guardian of marriage. Her influence guiding both the cycles of nature and the rituals of human life, her phases were carefully observed, marking the rhythms of planting and harvest, and her presence was a comfort to those who found peace under her gentle light. Mama Kia was a vision of serene beauty with silver hair that cascaded like moonlight over her shoulders and eyes that shimmered with a gentle, otherworldly glow. Her skin had a pale, almost luminous quality, and she wore flowing robes of soft white and blue that seemed to ripple like moonlit water. A delicate crescent moon rested on her forehead, and she often held a silver chalice representing the moon's phases. That's kind of cool if you think about it, because the cup fills and empties. Next came Pachamama, the earth goddess, the nurturing spirit of the earth. Her creation was a necessity. Viracocha knew that without a benevolent mother figure to care for the land, the world would never thrive. Pachamama was the embodiment of fertility, a goddess who provided the soil's richness and the bounty of the harvest. Farmers would offer her sacrifices, burying cocoa leaves and pouring chicha, a traditional fermented drink, into the ground to ask for her blessing. Her generosity allowed life to flourish, but she was also a force to be reckoned with. When disrespected, Pachamama could unleash natural disasters, reminders that she demanded care and reverence. Pachamama had a form that mirrored the lush, life giving land she governed. Her skin was the rich brown of fertile soil, and vines and flowers wove themselves into her long, dark hair. Her eyes sparkled with the green of new growth, and she wore a dress made of leaves, blossoms, and flowing rivers. Her presence exuded warmth and life, but when angered, storm clouds seemed to gather around her, and her gentle features grew fierce. Next up is Ilapa, or more likely Iapa. Pronunciating ain't always my thing. Viracocha's creation needed water to sustain it, and so he brought forth Iapa, the god of rain, thunder, and lightning. Iapa's arrival was anything but subtle. He appeared as a mighty warrior wielding a club and a sling that cracked lightning across the sky. His temper could be fierce, and his storms were both a blessing and a curse. The Inca prayed to Iapa when the fields were dry and the crops needed rain, but they also feared his destructive power. Iapa kept the world hydrated and fertile, but he also reminded humanity of nature's raw, untamed strength. Iapa was a towering, muscular figure, clad in armor made of glistening storm clouds, with lightning crackling around his body. His hair was wild and dark, like storm tossed waves, and his eyes flashed with blue white light. He carried a heavy club carved from obsidian, and a sling rested at his side, ready to hurl bolts of lightning. When he moved, the air seemed to charge with electricity, and thunder rumbled in his wake. Okay, we're going to do one more and then get into the early days of the actual Inca. But we got to get Supe in there, the god of death and the underworld. All the ancient cultures speak of the underworld, and they all speak of it as a physical place that mortals can go to. In Greek mythology, you've got Heracles and Theseus went into the underworld, and quite a few others. The Popol Vuh has the hero twins that went into the underworld, and what did they do? Play a game and win or something? It's been a while. And once again, are we talking about the same underworld or different underworlds? Different races could have been created by different gods and go to different places. And here's a really interesting little tidbit. When the Dalai Lama passes on, they go out to find where he reincarnated to, what body he reincarnated in, and they only search in Tibet. So do you reincarnate locally? That's one question. And is the underworld like the Bardos describe in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a place where you go for just a matter of weeks before you're reincarnated? I think it's like 40 or 50 days or something. And by the way, somebody commented, so you're saying that there's no afterlife, and then teary-eyed emojis. First off, I'm only giving my opinion on all of these things, just like everybody else. I have no idea what happens after you pass. I happen to think that reincarnation makes the most sense. But even in the reincarnation theory, there's the idea that you reincarnate in a higher world, depending on your karma, of course. So if you've passed your trials here on earth, then yes, you do move on to what could be called an afterlife, heaven, a better place than earth. But I have no idea. You may go to heaven and it may be a city of solid gold where you sing praises to God 24/7. Well, I guess there wouldn't be days, for eternity. But a city of gold just sounds like a man made idea to me. But yeah, there could be a heaven after this beyond our wildest dreams. I have no idea. Let's hope, right? All right, enough sidetracking. Supe ruled over the spirits of the dead, and his realm was a shadowy place filled with both mystery and fear. The Inca had a complicated relationship with Supe. He was both a necessary figure in the cycle of life and a source of dread. Miners who often disturbed the underworld with their work made special offerings to Supe to avoid accidents or curses. Now, I just saw that in a European documentary where they would leave gifts down in mines for the underworld gods. So it was definitely either a worldwide culture that communicated these beliefs to each other, or they actually all knew about these spirits of the underworld. Supe's presence was a reminder of mortality and the spiritual trials that awaited in the afterlife. Great, I thought there were enough of them here on Earth. Supi was a shadowy, sinister figure with skin the color of ash and eyes that burned with a deep, unsettling red. His long, tangled hair was black as night, and he wore a cloak woven from shadows and smoke. His hands were clawed, and he carried a staff adorned with the skulls of the dead. When Supi appeared, the air grew cold, and an eerie silence settled over the land as if the world itself were holding its breath. Oh yeah, we got to do one more before we get to the first Inca. Viracocha breathed life into the Apus, spirits that dwelled in the majestic Andes Mountains. Each mountain had its own Apu, a guardian spirit that protected the surrounding land and its people. These mountain gods were revered in ceremonies, and offerings were made at their peaks to gain their favor. The Apus were powerful protectors, but could also bring down wrath if disrespected. The mountains were seen as living entities, each Apu playing a crucial role in the health and spiritual balance of the land. So, all of the ancients thought that there was a spirit of the mountain, a spirit of the river. There were these entities in charge of all the natural resources, apparently. So now Viracocha turned his attention to the beings that would inhabit this new land. His previous attempt, the stone giants, had ended in disaster. This time he needed to create a race that would live harmoniously, honor the divine order, and appreciate the gifts of the earth. So he carefully fashioned a new kind of life humans. Viracocha sculpted these new beings from stone, but unlike the reckless giants who had come before, he made them smaller, humbler, and more capable of compassion. He carved their bodies with care, ensuring they had strong hands to till the soil, feet to walk the rugged mountains, and hearts that could love and honor the gods. When he was satisfied with his work, he breathed life into the stone forms, and human beings began to emerge. Interesting point here. These humans didn't just pop into existence in one place. Viracocha spread them out across the Andes, giving each group a unique origin story. And just from my other Inca studies, each tribe believed that they either came from or were part of a different star. There's just some connection between people and the stars and the gods and the planets and sun, moon. But Viracocha gave each group a unique origin story. Some people emerged from the cracks in the mighty boulders, others climbed out of the sacred caves, and still more rose from the depths of rivers and lakes. Each origin site was infused with spiritual significance, marking the land with places that the Inca would come to revere for generations. These were the first sacred sites, or hakas, but their deeper importance would come later. Viracocha didn't just bring humans to life and abandon them to figure things out on their own. Instead, he walked among them, teaching them the ways of civilization. He showed them how to cultivate crops, understanding that agriculture would be the backbone of their survival. The Inca people learned to plant potatoes and quinoa, mastering the art of terrace farming that allowed them to grow food on steep mountainsides. But Viracocha's lessons went beyond agriculture. He taught the people how to build homes from stone, constructing villages that could withstand the harsh elements of the Andes and could withstand earthquakes. So Viracocha taught them how to make these megalithic earthquake proof structures. So as much as the whole first half of this video sounded like they're just personifying forces of nature, here they're being taught things that are in no way just intuitive. And, if in the case of the megaliths, more advanced, or actually, I can't stand that word on here. It gets abused way too much. It doesn't take stone cutting lasers when you've got hundreds of thousands of people with nothing to do. So I have no personal problem with these being made by human hands, but there is a technical skill and level involved here that everybody says can't be replicated today. I think it can. It's just nobody's going to invest that much money because it wouldn't be cheap in today's world. But if you've got hundreds of thousands of followers with nothing else to do, I mean, if right now you gave me 100,000 people, by the end of my lifetime, I could get something close to this built. And a lot of people revert to the copper chisels and say all history's fake because of copper chisels. Well, I think they're wrong about copper chisels because Viracocha just taught them how to make tools. But I digress. Viracocha taught them how to do this. Now, whether that was just through influencing them, like they are the receiver and Viracocha sent it to them, or, I mean, some of the legends say that he's a white-haired, bearded dude that just disappeared off into the west one day, so they speak as if he physically walked among them. He instructed them in crafting tools, which would be needed to do all of this, weaving textiles, and creating pottery. Most importantly, he taught them about the gods, emphasizing the importance of ritual ceremonies and offerings. The people learned that their well-being depended on their respect for the divine beings who kept their world in balance. So Viracocha's teachings had laid the groundwork for human civilization. He knew that the Inca people needed more than just basic survival skills. They needed strong leaders, figures who could guide them in building an advanced society with order, spiritual reverence, and a deep connection to the divine. See, their first priority is a spiritual authority, not technology. And then check this out. To fulfill this need, the great sun god Inti, Viracocha's most radiant creation, stepped in to provide the Inca with two extraordinary leaders, Manco Capac and Mama Oko. So these royal bloodlines were created by Inti, the sun god, instead of Viracocha. The legend of Manco Capac and Mama Oko begins at Lake Titicaca, the vast and sacred body of water that shimmered like a jewel high in the Andes. In his divine wisdom, Inti decided that the lake would be the birthplace of the leaders destined to shape the future of the Inca people. One morning, as the first golden rays of the sun broke over the horizon, Manco Capac and Mama Oko emerged from the lake's glistening waters. They were not ordinary mortals. They carried within them the divine energy of Inti, radiating both authority and benevolence. They first set foot on land with a mission. Inti had given them the sacred task to find a place suitable for establishing a great city that would become the center of Inca civilization. This city would be a beacon of prosperity and spiritual devotion, a place where the people could live in harmony with God's wishes. So what they're essentially saying here is that there's more than one kind of person out there. There's the people that were planted like Johnny Appleseed all over the place and came crawling out of rocks and caves. And then there were these two custom deluxe models that had a little bit more of that spark in them. And these were the ones that were meant to guide all of the rest, or the royal bloodlines. Plus, Viracocha made all of the normal people, and then Inti made the royals. So now you're talking about two different creators of mankind. And I'm just pointing out what this says. So Inti, the one that created the rulers, provided Manco Capac with a golden staff known as the Tapakyari. This staff was no ordinary tool, it was imbued with a divine power. Inti told the two that they must search for a land where the staff would sink into the ground effortlessly. This place would be fertile and blessed, a perfect site for their new city. The two began their journey through the rugged Andean terrain, traveling across mountains, valleys, and rivers. They encountered many beautiful but unsuitable locations where the staff did not penetrate the soil. The two remained determined, driven by their mission and the will of their divine Father. Along the way, they taught the scattered people they encountered about agriculture, governance, and the importance of revering the gods. So that's a really interesting point, because then the gods just have to teach two people and then they go on and teach everybody else. After an arduous journey, the golden staff finally sank deep into the earth in a lush valley surrounded by mountains. This location would become Cusco, the beating heart of the Inca Empire. And I always found that interesting that he gave him a gold staff and said, when it sinks in the ground, you got the right spot, because then you've got, good aerated soil. Because if it's too compact, it's not going to grow as well. But I'm pretty sure it was because it was a floodplain. And Cusco, I'm pretty sure there's a story of it getting inundated after the time of Pachacuti Inca, which we'll get to in a minute. They wasted no time in establishing their new city. Manco Capac became the first Sapa Inca emperor, or just Inca. They call the king just Inca as well. And he taught the people how to construct terraces for farming, how to organize themselves into cohesive society, and how to build structures from stone that would stand earthquakes. So, just hypothetically here, you genetically manipulate two humans, make them really smart, and you raise them up and give them a good education and say, here, there's a bunch of other people out there. Now get them together and teach them what I taught you. But even with that, it seems like they had a higher spiritual purpose in mind with all of this, because Manco Capac and Mama Oko established the foundation of Inca society, balancing practical knowledge with spiritual devotion. Temples were built to honor Inti and all the gods, and ritual became an essential part of daily life. The city of Cusco was designed not just as a political and economic hub, but also as a spiritual center where the gods' presence could be felt in every stone. In prayer, their work was far from easy, and they faced numerous challenges, including uniting the various tribes and convincing them to abandon the old ways in favor of the new order. But the pair, carrying the authority of the sun god, eventually succeeded in bringing people together. They inspired the Inca with the promise of a society blessed by the gods, one that would thrive as long as they honored the divine order, with the world now filled with humans. And then came the Spanish and screwed it all up. And so here's the crazy part of all this for you guys that actually made it this far into the video. It's Thanksgiving. I figure you could use something good and long to watch. But this is the family tree of the Sapa Inca, the Inca emperors. It's only 13 generations or so. That's Manco Capac up at the top, who was made by Inti himself, the sun god. So it's only been 13 or so generations since all the Inca were created. Now, Western authoritative sources just say that Manco Capac was the first leader to arise, but in their own creation story, they say Manco Capac was made from Inti, the sun god. Now, when I was first studying this, I was trying to see if this lined up with the 1300s catastrophes that I was just learning about at the time, to see if anything lined up with other world known history. And I saw right off the bat what they had done with the timeline of the Sapa Incas is just giving them each 80 years. That's it. 80 years, we'll go with it. But I see here they've got a revised list on that, and that is lining up a little better with what I think is going on. But they had Manco Capac at 1200 AD, and now here they've moved it back to 945. And this is making a lot more sense to me personally, but it's still crazy they're saying that Manco Capac was created from Inti And we've got Manco Capac around 945 AD. But with this revision, now they've got Pachacuti Inca at around 1260, just before the 1300s catastrophes. And they had prophesied an end of the world age at Pachacuti's time. His name actually means an overturning of space time. And then Cusco got flooded during his reign, and he went up on a mountain praying to Viracocha to not end the entire world. So here they've got Pachacuti Inca dated between 1200 and 1473. So they don't know. I'll tell you when Pachacuti Inca lived. He lived at the time of the 1300s catastrophe, however accurate that dating is. And if that dating lines up with the corresponding events that happened all around the world, then is the dating for Manco Capac the first literal son of a god, a person built by the sun guy? Well, I'm making the sun confusing there, right? But that would put a god being in contact with humans just around 1,000 years ago. And like I've said about some of the Bible stuff, I think that there's a possibility that it was just about 1,000 years ago and they've really screwed up our timeline. Is it a coincidence that the people that kind of rule over academia put their heritage 1,000 years before everybody else? Oh, yeah, this painting we're looking at is the ancient city of Jericho, painted in the Nuremberg Chronicles in 1493. There's a whole bunch of ancient biblical artwork that looks strangely medieval. So anyway, that was kind of cool. There's a lot of different aspects to what they're saying there. But I think the two most interesting points they brought up was that not all humans were created equal and that they were created by two different gods even. Thankfully, I don't think any social justice warriors made it this far into the video, so don't let them find out. Oh, and Viracocha's first creation, the stone giants, which it says that mankind was made out of stone too. So, or the stone giants, the Nephilim from before the flood. It says that he wiped them out with a flood, but I don't think they were all wiped out because I've got a book from 1500s, I think, early Spanish explorers, and they personally saw the bones of giants. Anyway, interesting stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Ruckus is got up and ate a little bit with me here and there. I'm about 6 hours into this, but yeah, he's still kind of moping around. But I told him tomorrow is going to be a better day. Y'all have a good one. Static out.